President-elect Joe Biden is likely to choose former Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen as his Treasury Secretary. She would be the first woman to serve as Treasury Secretary in this White House role. She was also the first woman to serve as the head of the Federal Reserve. And so whether this is a good thing or bad thing, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, to be quite honest with you. Progressives seem to like her. Republicans also seem to like her. So I think it's worth mentioning why that is. And so Yellen led the Federal Reserve, or the central bank, from 2014 to 2018. She also served as the top White House economist during the Clinton administration. Now, before she was the head of the Federal Reserve, she was the head of the Federal Reserve for San Francisco. And during that time, she seemed to be a lot softer on Wells Fargo. For instance, in 2010, there was this big debate as to whether or not Wells Fargo should be able to pay dividends to its investors or to engage in stock buybacks. Janet Yellen seemed to be very much in favor of allowing them to do that, even though it jeopardized their capital reserves, which was one of the regulation requirements following the economic collapse of 2008. The whole point of that regulation was to ensure that these banks had enough money reserved, so if there was some sort of shock to the economy, they would have these capital reserves to kind of get them through that rainy day. But Janet Yellen took a position on it that I personally disagree with. However, she's done some pretty great things as well. So according to Adam Green, who is the founder of the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, he said Janet Yellen has absolutely shown a willingness to challenge corporate power and not be intimidated by big banks. That is a key ingredient as you rebuild our economy. And so I'm guessing that part of what he's referring to is Janet Yellen's actions following a Senate hearing where Elizabeth Warren gave this impassioned speech about holding Wells Fargo accountable for opening up all of these fake accounts without their customers' consent. So let's take a look at what Warren had to say on the Senate floor.
Time after time, big banks cheat their customers and no actual human beings are held accountable. Instead, there's a fine, which ultimately is paid for by shareholders, not by executives, and certainly not by directors of the board. And nothing's going to change at these big banks if that doesn't change. You know how I know that for a fact? Is because in 2011, the Fed fined Wells Fargo $85 million for illegally steering mortgage borrowers into costlier loans. And the Fed specifically said those illegal practices were caused by, quote, incentive compensation and sales quota programs and the lack of adequate controls to manage the risks resulting from these programs. So the Fed fined Wells in 2011 for failing to manage the risks resulting from bad incentive compensation practices. And what did Wells do? For the next 4 years, immediately after that fine, the board signed off on incentive compensation practices that led to the creation of 2 million fake accounts. Fines are not working.
So following that, effort to ensure that Wells Fargo actually paid some real consequences for their behavior, Janet Yellen did act. She froze growth at Wells Fargo, and 4 of Wells Fargo's board members were taken off the board. There was also a financial fine associated with that as well. But it's part of the reason why she seems to get support from both Democrats and Republicans, progressives and conservatives. Because she is willing to hear people out, and she is willing to take action when a situation calls for action, as it did with that Wells Fargo story. But I have more details for you, Cenk. I wanted to hear your thoughts first, though.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a compromise pick. So that's as good as progressives are going to get. Other progressive groups were in favor of her because she's good on the environment. So let me just acknowledge that and give credit for that. Now I'm going to keep it real with you guys and tell you what my best guess is as to what Yellen's actually going to do. And so somebody's wrong about this, because progressives and Wall Street do not agree. Wall Street is very happy with the pick because they think she's going to do nothing. Progressives are happy with the pick because they think she's going to do something. So who's right? My best guess is Wall Street is right. And I hate to say that, and I hope my brothers and sisters in the progressive movement are correct. But she might play around the edges, might say things that are rhetorically good. But so why am I guessing she's going to do nothing? Because when she was head of the Federal Reserve, she largely did nothing. She could have moved the rates up, and she barely did it, very incremental. She was nervous. She was nervous, not correct word there, careful, right? Too careful in my opinion. Careful about what? Well, it might upset the banks and stuff. I get it, it's the head of the Federal Reserve, you have to care what the banks think, right? But they had $4 trillion in toxic assets they were supposed to move off their books, eventually sell them and at least get some money back. She barely did any of that, and that's because she was too careful. With that kind of, basically, it's not ideology, and it's not what she wants to do. It's just her governing method. And so if your governing method is super careful and Joe Biden is the person who picked you, you're likely to be super careful. That means doing close to nothing.
I want to go ahead and show you a tweet by CNBC that shows how the Dow Jones Industrial responded to this announcement. Stocks jumped to session highs after Dow Jones reports that President-elect Biden has chosen Janet Yellen to be Treasury Secretary, potentially the first woman to serve in the role. So you can see in the graphic that they linked to that the market certainly did react favorably to it. And when she was confirmed to basically be the head of the Federal Reserve, there were a lot of Republicans who voted in favor of confirming her. So this is all stuff to take in mind. I agree with your assessment, Cenk. I think that she's done some pretty decent things in the past, but the fact that the stock market is happy with this pick, I think is a little foreshadowing. Yeah, so is she better than Mnuchin? Only by 1,000-fold. So she's not a crook. She's a perfectly normal bureaucrat that has done some positive things, as Anna pointed out. And again, I want to reemphasize, a lot of progressives are actually happy to see her in that role. So this is not something where the Biden team was being aggressive against progressives. You could argue that it's the opposite case. She was on lists that progressives thought were acceptable and good candidates. So credit to the Biden team for reaching out in that sense. But if I had to put money on it, I'd say Wall Street has her better figured out than we do. And they're probably excited that because they know she ain't gonna do anything. And Republicans agree. They love it when the Treasury Secretary doesn't do anything and keeps the status quo. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.